to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
The war on drugs. So I don't think it's working. I don't think it's effective. I think it's bull, mostly, to be honest with you. Here's the part I don't understand. I don't understand why we're not raiding college dorms and why we're not raiding white suburban neighborhoods. We don't even have much of a war right now. We have selected battlegrounds. That's what we have. We have specific battlegrounds across this country, mostly targeting urban areas.
And minorities.
Why people use pot all the time on college dorms? Yeah. They use cocaine too, you know that? And they use a whole lot more than that too. Right. White suburban neighborhoods. America's doing drugs, man. I mean, but we're targeting selected locations. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And it's just and it's not that effective.
No, and when you say it's not that effective, are you talking about the overall use of drugs in a harmful way, or are there less people?
Because
we spend $50 billion a year and nothing changes.
Yes. Look,
the same people.
If people want to do drugs, we should know this by now. We started this in the the 70s. I need to check that date because now it's bothering me. I can't. I want to say either 62 or something. We'll check the date in a second. But we've been trying this for a while, man. I mean, 50 years, 40 years. We've been at this a while. Like, we don't go to war with Vietnam for 50 years. And if it's not working, we still keep doing it. We don't have the Civil War for 30 years in this country. And if it's not working, we still keep doing it.
Well, okay, so I would actually argue that we do, unfortunately. But your point remains. We shouldn't.
No,
so
we shouldn't.
It's like the war on poverty. It's like, it's like it's just a transfer of wealth from producers to non-producers, and the same people stay rich and the same people stay poor for the most part. Like when the government declares war on something, that doesn't necessarily, it doesn't seem to have any kind of correlation to its elimination or,
100%.
So government declares war on poverty seems to grow. Government declares war on terror. It certainly doesn't seem to, eliminate terror or even really reduce it all that much. It's like, so we do like the war on terror, the government, there's elements of the government that do want perpetual war because it funds their programs and their whole thing. And that's what you see happening with the, everybody kind of loves to hate the military industrial complex and that maybe that's a pejorative for some people and maybe it's a point of pride for others, but it is something that, demands being fed. And so you kind of have to keep at war if you're going to keep them busy. And the same is true on the drug war side. Yeah. There's a whole industry around it. There's a whole prison industry. There's private prisons that need to stay filled. The beds need to stay filled. It's like the hotel guy's out of business. The guy that owns the prison, he's rocking and rolling.
Doing good, So you're totally right. And partly what I mean with, but also just to touch on that real quick. So broadly, if we're going to fight a war on terror, where someone's going to come from within our own country or come into our country from the outside and blow people up with bombs, that war is fighting as long as we need to fight that war. Or whatever we got to do to keep our people safe. I get it.
Right.
I don't care if that goes 50 years. But when you have a high number of 67,300 deaths in America in 2018. Okay, this is the total deaths from overdoses in America in 2018. 67,300. Now, that does include prescription opioids, and I could not find a statistic that had that broken out. It may exist. I couldn't find it. If someone's listening, email me, thekentlapppodcast@gmail.com. So here, that's a high number, Patrick. 67,300 from overdoses in America in 2018. That's a high number because that includes, again, I repeat, that includes prescription opioids. That's probably the majority. We're going to war over 67,300 overdoses a year. Again, it's a high number because that includes the opioids. We're going to go to war when more than that die from alcohol every year. That number is about 88,000. The best case for legalization of any drug that's coming to mind right now, I'm quickly trying to think, is there an exception to this? And there may be one, but it wouldn't be heroin, it wouldn't be cocaine, it wouldn't be, maybe there's an exception. But the best case for the legalization of all drugs is alcohol. The fact that alcohol is legal in this country and we're still around and some people abuse it and a lot of people don't, alcohol is lethal, dude. It is deadly.
Right.
And it's legal, okay? The fact that alcohol is legal in this country and things aren't worse than they are in my opinion, it's the best case for drug legalization that's out there.
Right. There are some societal costs, obviously, to having alcohol be legal, right? But we decided we're willing to pay those societal costs in order to enjoy whatever benefits there might be.
Yeah.
So you're right. That's and alcohol. Like if you look at the amount of people that die from alcohol, and you look at the role that alcohol plays in crime, like it's way outsized any other drug. By a huge margin.
Of vehicle deaths in 2014, alcohol was responsible for a third of them, of driving fatalities. There was 9,967 deaths in 2014, driving fatalities, which, by the way, I can't help but mention it. Like, you know how many of those 9,967 deaths we heard of in 2013? I didn't hear of many at all.
Right.
But when there's one death from a self-driving car, you know what I mean? You know who hears about that? Everybody hears about that.
Yeah, we all know all the particulars of it.
Exactly. But the driving deaths in this country in 2014, alcohol accounted for 31%. Let's talk about some of the racially motivated rules, laws, policies that were put into place. You mentioned Nixon. Is that kind of where it starts, you think?
I think it started before then in general. Like you had like I mentioned, like the whole fear of the Mexican immigrants, like that was maybe early 1900s when that kind of really started. Nixon was the first one to kind of really crack down and say, we're going to start, aligning the federal government's efforts in a way to knock out, drug use, if you will. And that did seem like drugs were heavily enforced, to your point. The prohibition against drugs were heavily enforced in minority neighborhoods, and it was seen largely as a black man's drug, or like marijuana, cocaine, a lot of those drugs, well, cocaine to a lesser extent, but marijuana in particular was hugely enforced. There's so many people in prison, even now still, for marijuana offenses that were, you think about putting somebody in a prison cell for a plant, like that's crazy.
It's absurd. It's absurd. And just to touch on, this is one thing I wanted to point out too, and talk about like the war is not working, because a lot of people think, here's why I gave that stat about the amount of overdose every year in this country, is because I thought even as recent as several weeks ago that illegal drugs are super dangerous and they're, killing a lot more people than they are, frankly. That was my assumption. I figured if we're taking tanks down our own city streets and sending in SWAT teams and beating down doors and shooting people before they wake up, and taking a mom with 3 kids and sending her to jail for 15 years because one of her kids had marijuana in a locked box in the attic. If we're doing this in America, and we're spending the billions of dollars, it sounds like that we are, and we're dividing homes and we're herding people like cattle into these holding areas and putting them in quarantine. And then when they get out, they're on parole and they can't get a job because they're a felon, and they can't get public housing and they can't get food stamps, and basically shunning them from society. I just assumed if we're doing this is really bad. This is a war worth fighting.
Right.
This must be awful what's going on. But when you look at the statistics, man, it's just not. And this is the other thing that I assume too, is that, okay, this war is worth fighting because surely, like, we're going after the people who sell it. Like that's who we're capturing here. That's who we're sending to prison, and it's not. 4 out of 5 drug arrests are users, not sellers.
Right.
So here's this to the point on racism. Okay, this is John Ehrlichman, chief domestic advisor to Richard Nixon. This is a direct quote. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had 2 enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did.
Wow.
That's not hearsay. That's not a rumor. That's a direct quote.
That's basically, well, that's evil.
That's evil. That is evil. Here's President Nixon himself. Here's his ad that was being run. Here's the ad. I'll just read it. The advertisement began with frightening music accompanied by flashing images of protesters, bloodied victims, and violence. You're starting to get the picture already. A deep voice then said, "It is time for an honest look at the problem of order in the United States. Dissent is a necessary ingredient of change, but in a system of government that provides for peaceful change, there is no cause that justifies resort to violence. Let us recognize that the first right of every American is to be free from domestic violence. So I pledge to you, we shall have order in the United States." At the end of the ad, a caption declared, "This time, vote like your whole world depended on it. Nixon." Viewing his campaign ad, Nixon reportedly remarked with glee that the ad, quote, it hits it right on the nose. It's all about those damn Negro, Puerto Rican groups out there. This is the president of the United States, dude. This is in 1972. Didn't it just say 1972?
Playing on our fears of those that are different from us
Yeah.
for their own political power.
Yes. Exactly.
It's
scary.
It is. It's so starkly against everything that the gospel draws us into.
Yeah.
It's like when you look at the life and the person of Jesus and who he was for. Mm-hmm. Like he was for the downtrodden. He was for the poor. He was for the minority. Mm-hmm. He was for those who were disempowered.
Yes.
He was
for the weak. Yeah.
He was for the weak. And to live in a society where we just have these remaining systemic problems with just being evil to the same kinds of people that Jesus loved. Like that does need to change.
Yes. Yeah.
I think agree. It starts by this kind of conversation.
It does.
And I think,
and it's but your point. I don't want to move over that. I don't want to pass over this point too quick, though. I think you touched on the key thing, which is the driving motivation here is the gospel. That's the driving. That's what's going to enact change here, because we're not okay having some brothers and sisters of ours be treated differently than others based on the color of their skin or their socioeconomic status, that type of a thing, and that desire for equality, that's driven from the gospel. That needs to be the motivation here.
Right. It's that desire to see people, to see everyone have an equal opportunity.
Yes.
Because everyone is created equally in the image of God.
Yes, 100%.
It's like that's one of the most, profound things that Genesis laid out. It's like at that time when that was written, this idea that man and woman are both equal in the image of God, both made in the image of God.
Yeah.
Like nobody believed that back then.
Yeah. Good point.
That was a radical thing to say. And so that's God, right?
Yes.
So it's like now, to the extent that we can make that, to the extent that we can heal that, we ought to work towards it.
Yes, totally agree. Yeah, here's the date I was looking for. So, by the way, this book's really great.
The New Jim
The
Crow.
New Jim Crow.
I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of statistics, and so it's taking me some time to read it because it's very data driven, which I like. But here it says most people assume the war on drugs was launched in response to the crisis caused by crack cocaine in inner city neighborhoods. One thing to point out here is that crack cocaine is the same. You have crack cocaine, you have powder cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, more poor people are using the crack cocaine, which is what would you call it, like a liquid form or like a gel type substance, basically?
Liquid-ish.
Liquid.
Form,
Mostly injecting that with a needle, correct? Or
you
smoking?
can also burn it.
Okay.
Smoke it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's crack cocaine. And then powder cocaine is what you see a lot of times in the movies. If someone has that
snorting
white
it.
powder and you put in a little trail and you snort the trail, it's crack cocaine. It's the same thing. They're equally as deadly. A lot of people don't know that because up until recently, the rules in this country were if you got caught with crack cocaine, mandatory sentencing was 100 times worse than powder cocaine.
Because powder cocaine was used by rich white kids, crack cocaine was used by poor black kids.
Ka-ching. So, all right. So there is no notion to the truth that the war on drugs was launched in response to crack cocaine. Okay, I think this is what a lot of people thought. Like the war on drugs, this is being launched in response. Nope. President Ronald Reagan officially announced the current drug war in 1982, before crack became an issue in the media or a crisis in poor black neighborhoods. The Reagan administration hired staff to publicize the emergence of crack cocaine in 1985, 3 years after the drug war was declared, as part of a strategic effort to build public and legislative support for the war. The media campaign was an extraordinary success.
I'll say. Yeah.
I mean, dude, there's no part of this that's funny. It's just so absurd. I mean, it's crazy.